We're going to wrap up this Get Real series we've been in for the last 8 weeks. And today we're going to talk about just a specific word, but there are words, there are items, there are cultural icons in our culture that have multiple meanings. They just have multiple meanings to them. For instance, let me give you some words that are that way. The word date, okay? The word date can mean a fruit, like a date, or the word date can mean like I'm going out on a date with someone. Okay, so it has multiple meanings. The word engaged, it can mean I got engaged, or I hope you guys stay engaged today as I talk, all right? There's two words for that. The word leaves, there's beautiful fall leaves out there and colors in the trees, and the leaves are beautiful, or they have leaves every morning to go to work. Same word, double meanings. There's right, where you could say you are right, or you need to turn right. There is rose, which is your favorite rose. My favorite flower is a rose, or you rose from your seat. Same spelling, different meanings. Type. I can type 100 words a minute, or she's not my type. Okay, you have different meanings to it. Last one, crane. You have a bird crane, or you have like the big the construction equipment called a crane. Okay, same spellings, different meanings to these words. If you do not have English as your first language, this can get horribly confusing, all right? Because you're looking and going, but that's that word for that, and you're telling me it's for that too. How do I distinguish between the two? It gets very confusing. There's other things in our culture. A Swiss Army knife, okay? Is a Swiss Army knife a knife? Is it? Or is it a corkscrew opener? Or is it a bottle opener or a compass? Or is it scissors, a screwdriver, or nail files? Which is it? You don't know. You can't say because it's all of those things. One thing is all of them. It's the ultimate tool of the American dream, is a Swiss Army knife. All right? Now the last one, cultural icons, is this guy, the Incredible Hulk. Is he good or is he bad? You don't know, do you? Sometimes he's good, sometimes he's bad. So I'm going to take a quiz here. How many of you think the Incredible Hulk is actually a good guy? Raise your hand. That's just because you've seen him in the Avenger movies. You don't know more about him than that. Okay. How many of you think the Hulk is a bad guy? There's a few of you. You can have courage. You can raise your good job, Christian. And Joyce is with you back there. Joyce thinks you are. Oh, and look, little Allison's with you too. And oh, the little girl club is with you. They're smart. They're smart. Okay. Here's the deal, is today we're going to talk about one of those spiritual concepts that has multiple meanings, but it uses just one word, and that is the word worship. And we're going to look at that concept. Now, because it has multiple meanings, one of the things you will find is it's nearly impossible for non-believers, non-Christians to understand the concept of Christian worship. They just won't get it. It is totally foreign to them. They can't comprehend it. But at the same time, because of its multiple meanings, even for Christians, it can get slightly confusing because you hear certain meanings of it taught regularly and other ones you don't. And so you might miss different aspects of worship and what that word worship means to a Christian. So today we're going to get real and we're just going to talk about what is the meaning of the word worship in a Christian's life. What does it look like? What are the different concepts and the different aspects of worship? And there are 3 of them we're going to discuss this morning. So let me go through those. The first one is this. You have the concept of personal worship. Okay? The first aspect of the word worship to a Christian is personal worship. And what that is this. It's an emotional thing. It's an eternal thing. It's something between you and God. It is very personal, and I would consider it your personal connection to God or your emotional connection to God. It's your awareness of His holiness, His greatness, and His timelessness. It's kind of like an awe that you have of God, a sense of awe that you have inside you. The problem with this one is this. It looks different for all of us. Okay, God has designed us all differently to personally worship God in different ways, but it is our connection to Him. If you are someone that's not more geared to being emotional, how many of you are close to emotionally dead like me? If you're that person, raise your hand. Okay, there's several of us. How many of you would say you would lean very emotional? Raise your hand if you're, okay? And how many of you are just kind of, you're a fairly well-balanced emotional state? which is what we all want to say, but I know I'm not. Okay, I'll be honest with you. So here's the deal, is God works in all of us differently. Some of us will find this easier, some of us will find this harder, but one of the concepts of worship is this personal aspect of it, where it's an eternal thing and an emotional connection you have to God. The way it works for me, being close to an emotionally dead person, where it does relate to me is this. It's that sense of overwhelmingness I get from God when I think of the concept of God. We discussed this a little in my Sunday school class this morning, going through Revelation chapter 4, and you get the whole throne room of God and what's happening there. But it's the overwhelming sense that I get that I am me and God is God. Okay? That's the personal worship side. And what that does is it leads me to respect him. It leads me to have a relationship with him. It leads me to desire to know him and have a regular connection and relationship on a daily basis with him. That's what this does. I want to read to you from Ephesians chapter 3. Here's what it says starting in verse 16. It says, this is Paul speaking. He says, I pray that from his glorious, unlimited resources, he will empower you with inner strength through the Spirit. He says, then Christ will make his home in your hearts as you trust in him. Your roots will grow down into God's love and keep you strong. And may you have the power to understand, as all God's people should, how wide, how long, how high, and how deep his love is. May you experience the love of Christ, though it is too great to understand fully. Then you will be made complete with all the fullness of life and power that comes from God. But Paul says, he says this, I wish this upon all of you as Christians, that you would understand the greatness of God, his love for you, his power, just that awe that you would have of God. Because what it does is it helps you live the rest of your life in a sense of worship to him as well. Because you realize life is not about you, life is about him. Life is not about your will and your desires. Life is about his will and his desires for your life. That's what personal worship leads you to. Now, in each aspect of worship, God had a design behind it, that it would benefit you if you would worship God in this way. When you talk about personal worship, let me tell you what the huge benefit is. It produces inner strength in you, or inner spiritual strength in you. It is your personal connection to God that gets you through the rough times in life, that gets you through the hardest moments in life. It's not necessarily going to be the next two things we talk about in worship, but it's this personal one, which is I have an awe and a reverence and a fear of God, and through those, it gets me through the tough times here, and I'm able to make the right choices I need to make, knowing that I fear God, and it's him that I'm trying to please, not everybody else. And through that connection, I can get through times that non-believers can't. I can get through and make it out on the other side undamaged and actually benefited and strengthened where non-believers can't, because of that personal relationship and that personal worship I have with God. It leads to an inner strength that you can't get from anywhere else. Okay? That's the first concept of worship. The second concept of worship is this. It's corporate worship. It's what we are doing here today as we are gathered together. It is where God's people gather together to worship God as a community. It's where we acknowledge publicly together as God's people that we recognize God's holiness, greatness, and timelessness. That we realize that he is all holy. He is without sin and blemish. That he is great. He is a creator of the universe. That he is timeless. That he is eternal. He is our creator. Now, this usually includes corporate worship, a time of worship through singing and through teaching. When you view God's people forever, you will always see this act of corporate worship. There always seems to be an element of worship through singing and of teaching, which, to be honest with you, is kind of odd. If you think about it, how many of you have been Christians at least 20 plus years and attend church fairly regularly? Okay? If you've been those people, getting together with a group of people and singing publicly isn't anything weird to you. Okay, you're just used to it. But if you're someone that comes from a non-Christian background, outside of going to a concert, you don't gather places publicly and sing publicly. Because in this group here, there's probably about 4 or 5 that probably have gifted voices that you sing real well. And the rest of us are average or you're tone deaf. All right? But we all get together and we sing publicly together without even worrying about that. Why? Because we're here to worship God publicly as a congregation. as a corporate body. We get together. So it's not weird to us. But throughout history, we've always seen God's people worship through song. You have the entire book, the largest book of the Bible, the book of Psalms, 150 chapters, but it's basically 150 songs that God's people have sung and were recorded. So even back in Israel's day, they always were singing worship to God. When you read Psalms 100, here's what you read. It says this: "Shout with joy to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come before him, sing with joy. Acknowledge that the Lord is God. He made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving. Go into his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name, for the Lord is good. His unfailing love continues forever, and his faithfulness continues to each generation." When we gather as a body, we sing songs together and worship. Why? Because we want to give him worship and know he deserves it. So you can get a sense of awe. You can get a sense of community. At times, you get a sense of, more than other times, that God's presence is right on you when you are worshiping together as a corporate body of Christ. Okay? So that's why God calls us to worship him in that way. And there's always this element of singing. There's always this element of teaching. Now, the thing I applaud Heather on, one, with her worship lane, she's been here 10 years. You guys don't know this because you don't know the ins and outs. You don't see what ministry is. But we live in a culture now where there is tons of music. Is there not? In a Christian community, we have radio stations. There's all sorts of forms. What Heather has to do is this. She has to go through and find out what songs are singable for a corporate group, what songs are even good that even would be good to sing together. But three, and this is one most of you are unaware of, the theological meaning behind them and the wording to them. Are they songs that make us worship him, or are they songs about us? And they're focusing on us. Heather is exceptional at going through and making sure that the songs we pick are on God. So there's a lot of songs you'll hear on the radio and you go, why don't we sing those at church? Because they're about you. They're not about God. So they're not a corporate worship song. They're great on the radio. They're great in the car singing to them, things like that, but they're not good for corporate worship. And so she has to go through those things and analyze those and go, here's a song that matches all three of these things. It sounds good. It would work well for us. We can sing it. And it's focused on worship of God. And that's how she goes through and picks those songs. And then those are the ones she introduces and we learn over time. Is there songs that help us lead us into worship of God? Here's a corporate body. The other aspect's teaching. That's why I get up here and speak each week, is God gifted some of us to speak, to teach, to preach to the body so we can worship that way as well. In Colossians 3:16 and 17, it says this. It says, "Let the message about Christ and all of its richness fill your lives. Teach and counsel each other with all the wisdom he gives. Sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs to God with thankful hearts. And whenever you do this, and whatever you do or say, do it as a representative of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks through God, thanks through him to God the Father." So we always see this corporate worship amongst God's people before Jesus with Israel, and now with God's church after Christ with his churches. We always worship in words, and we worship in music and singing together as a church. And now there's a purpose behind this, I believe. When you look at why God designed a church and some of that, one of the key purposes of corporate worship is this: encouragement. It was supposed to be a time that you came and you were encouraged and you were with God's people and realized, even if you have internal spiritual strength from your personal worship of God, there's a whole bunch of other people around me that encourage me because they're on the same journey with me and we're all a family together. And so there's an aspect of encouragement. It's why the scriptures warn us, don't stop meeting together with God's people. You have this concept now, people go, I can worship God on my own. I can have my personal worship. Absolutely you can. But God also designed corporate worship to encourage you, to benefit you that way. And you're missing that if you're not with God's people on a regular basis. It's why it's so important for churches to make sure what we do when we're here is focused on him and not us. Because when we're focused on us, we get dysfunctional. We chirp at each other. We get on each other's nerves. We say things we shouldn't say. When it's on him, we worship him. We keep him in the forefront of things, and we are encouraged as a group, as a body, to serve God and continue to worship him privately and publicly. Okay? So that was the benefit of corporate worship. The last sense of worship you see in the scriptures is this concept of lifestyle worship. Now, this is one, I think it's lost in a translation. More, we hear mostly about corporate worship and the singing of song. This is another one that gets lost a lot of times. We don't talk as much about, I would say it this way. We talk about this concept, but we don't attach the word worship to it the way it is in the scriptures. And what that is this, living your life in such a way that you honor God with your day-to-day outward actions. It has nothing to do with singing. It has literally nothing to do with emotions or teaching or anything. It's literally the decisions you make on a daily basis, and are they honoring to God or not honoring to God? And it, based on what you are doing, determines if you are worshiping God or not worshiping God. Here's how it says it in Romans chapter 12. It says this, "And so, dear brothers and sisters," this is Paul speaking, he says, "I plead with you." Now let me stop you, don't read ahead for a second. Paul uses very specific language here. He says, he starts off, he says, "And also, dear brothers and sisters," so he's talking to a Christian body, and he says, "I plead with you." He's writing to a church. Here's why he's going to plead with them, what he's going to plead with them. Some of you, depending what age group you're in, you have seen America's moral compass change drastically over your lifetime, right? What's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what's considered good, what's considered bad, things like that. And you think it's bad and you think it's extreme. Let me help you understand for a second, though, who Paul is writing to. This church in Romans, and Rome. The church he's writing to and the churches he writes to all throughout the New Testament. The culture they were in makes ours look like kids' play. Okay? They're dealing with huge temples of prostitutes on hills that the cities are built around, where people walk up the hills and go sleep with prostitutes and then go back home. Okay? They're living in cultures where there is no moral right or wrong in any concept we would have of it. And so what you have is you have people coming out of that culture, because this is the beginning of the church. You have a Paul, they're pulling people out of this culture that still, that is their identity, that's what they're used to. And now they are part of God's people, they are his brothers and sisters, they are his church. And Paul's going, I know this is what you're used to, but I'm pleading with you, you have to live differently. I'm begging you, you have to live differently. Even though the society around you lives this other way, I'm begging you, you have to live differently. And here's what he says. He says, "So I plead with you, I beg you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you." What some of them had the understanding of, and there was false teachers in the church, was this. It's all about up here. And you just love God with your mind, and what you do with your body, you do with your body. Do whatever you want with it. It doesn't really matter. As long as you acknowledge God here and you commit here, the rest of the stuff you do is fine. And Paul's going, no, I'm begging you, I'm pleading with you. He says here, he says, give your bodies to God also because of all he has done for you. He says, let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to what? Worship him. Let me tell you why. When you have personal worship in your life, when you have corporate worship in your life, it will transform your life and it will start to show on the outside because you will live differently than the society around you. Okay? Those two, if they're happening in your life and they're genuine, will change what others see on the outside. And that's what Paul's saying here. He's saying, let your body be a living and holy sacrifice. This is the kind he finds acceptable. He said, this truly is your way to worship him. He says, don't copy the behaviors and customs of this world. He's talking about their society, but even our society as well. Don't copy the behaviors and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Okay, now, there's a very specific reason for this type of worship in your life. You have personal worship that strengthens you internally. You have corporate worship that encourages you. Now what you have is you have this whole concept of this type of worship, of lifestyle worship, where what it is to be an example to the world around you. It is to point out that you are a follower of Jesus Christ to the world around you, that you are different. You live such a lifestyle that it is impossible for people to see you and be around you and know something is not different about you than everyone else they know. That's what lifestyle worship was about. As you were to become a foreigner, you were to become, as you hear other words in the scriptures, an alien in this world. That you looked drastically different than the people around you. Um, this is key because here's the thing. You can be personally worshiping God all day long in your life and be very strong in that area. But people might not know you're a follower of Jesus Christ. Okay? You can go to church and corporate worship in here and sing together, but the only people that see it are the people that are in here with us. Okay? This is the one that affects your everyday world and people see on the outside. This is where you become able to impact other people's lives as a message of Jesus Christ, and it starts with you live differently. So the question you have to ask yourself on a lifestyle worship is, looking at your life, does it stick out from people who do not know Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior? Like, is there a clear, defining mark that goes, this is me, that's them, and it's pretty obvious? That's a question you have to look at. Now, again, I always want to temper this because of what the church has done. Just because you're here and the world's over here, that does not mean what you're due to worship God is go over here and tell these people how they're all bad and awful. That's not your role. That's not why you live your lifestyle the way you do. You live your lifestyle to honor God. And through honoring God, these people, some of them will see that and go, I want to know more. And then you have the opportunity to share the good news of Jesus Christ with people. You have the opportunity to let them know who Jesus Christ is and how you worship him in multiple ways in your life and what that word worship means. Okay? But that's what the lifestyle worship serves for. It influences the world around you. So through understanding, through practicing, and through growing in your understanding of what it means to worship God, what you will find in your life is you will be strengthened, you will be encouraged, and you will start to influence the people around you for the kingdom of God. You see, worship of God is not to provide him something he needs. God does not need your worship. He is God. The reason we worship God is to provide him something he deserves. He deserves our worship. He is our creator. And through our worship of him, what we will see is this, as he begins to transform our lives. And we start to become more and more like Jesus Christ, who is our model to live by. All right? Worship God in all three areas of your life, and God will transform you into looking like Jesus. Pray with me.